Governor Boyd McCleary says the governor's office and the Department of Disaster Management cannot work in isolation to manage disasters in the territory, that it is a shared responsibility. The governor is speaking to JTV News about the Disaster Management Act 2011 and legislators' concerns that the bill excludes elected representatives' involvement during a disaster. The governor said there is plenty of scope for the involvement of members of the House of Assembly.
Well, I can understand the point that's being made. The governor has for many years chaired the Disaster Management Council. The governor has had prime responsibility for the disaster preparedness component. That's been the case here, it's the case in other overseas territories, and that replicates systems elsewhere in the Caribbean too. The governor's role as being in charge of disaster management derives from the Constitution, where internal security is allocated to the governor. But the governor can't work in isolation, the DDM can't work in isolation. It's very much a partnership with the Premier, with other parts of government. I chair the National Disaster Management Council, but the Premier is Deputy Chair of that council. The Premier and other ministers are often participate in meetings held up DDM during the events themselves. And the bill has been specifically designed to ensure that there's full consultation with the Premier, with Cabinet and with the House of Assembly on critical matters. And there are several sections that require the Director of the Disaster Management Department to report to Cabinet and to the House of Assembly. We've got a meeting coming up this month, actually, the next couple of weeks, which is the meeting of the National Disaster Management Council, and the Premier will be there. And there's plenty of scope for members of the House of Assembly to input. They're fully briefed on the impact of any hazard, and of course they're involved in the relief phase and in the aftermath of a disaster, because it's happening often in their constituencies.
Governor McCleary said the Disaster Management Act updates the 10-year-old legislation that governs the management of disasters, which is a consultative approach involving members of Cabinet, other members of the House of Assembly, and the Department of Disaster Management. However, when Premier Dr. Orlando Smith brought the bill for the second and third reading of the Disaster Management Act during the April 29th sitting of the House, legislators on both sides of the House of Assembly opposed the bill, suggesting that the bill gives too much power to the governor and doesn't involve elected representatives.
Madam Speaker, it does seem to me, I don't know who else have found the clause, but I have not found it in this draft bill, where at any time there's any role for any elected official.
This bill, Madam Speaker, seems to give the governor a lot of power, plenty of power. But I got to see that the people are represented. And how are you going to have a governor making a proclamation for disaster without the Cabinet even being consulted?
After the debate, the Disaster Management Act 2011 was referred to a select committee of the House of Assembly, comprising Minister Ronnie Skelton, Deputy Speaker Delores Christopher, and Leader of the Opposition Ralph O'Neill, before it is returned to the House for approval. Governor McCleary disagrees with the legislators' claims. He said it is a shared responsibility.
I don't think it's right to think that the power rests only with the governor. The governor has the lead responsibility for ensuring that we're prepared. But when we have the hurricane and the aftermath of the aftermath is actually the direct responsibility of the Premier and his team. So there's a division of responsibilities, but really it's a shared responsibility. We have to work together to ensure that the territory is best placed to prepare for and to deal with a disaster when it comes.
In outlining the reasons for the bill, Premier Smith said SEDARA has urged Caribbean countries to develop strategic management along with institutional strengthening and support for comprehensive disaster management at the national level. Dr. Smith said the SEDARA model was revised in 2006, and after a review of the BVI Disaster Management Act 2003 against the SEDARA model, a number of deficiencies were identified, and it was recommended that a new bill be developed. Director of Disaster Management Charlene Dabrio says the bill will guide the country into the next decade, establishing systems for quick recovery.
I am very pleased that this type of discussion is taking place and that the ministers would see that this is really a critical piece of legislation that needs detailed discussions. And this is going to guide the country into the next 10, 15 years. And so we want to make sure that when we are impacted, we have systems in place where we can recover quickly. But I do understand the concerns of the ministers. They want to be involved, but I do want to say that we do have processes that will allow them to be involved, that will allow them to be briefed before they visit their constituencies.
We asked Governor McCleary whether he had any concerns that the bill is yet to be approved by the legislators. The governor said members of the House should recognize that the bill is the best possible legislation in place to address disaster management in the territory.
Obviously, the House has every right to scrutinise the legislation. That's what they're there for. The bill has been presented to the House, approved by Cabinet, presented to the House, and has gone to them to consider. But I think as the House looks at that bill, they should recognise the importance of ensuring that with the best possible legislation in place. Just look back what's happened over the last couple of years. Look at the major storms, Hurricane Sandy, most recently the Oklahoma tornado. So we have to do everything possible to ensure that we prepare for those events, to safeguard lives, safeguard investments, and the environment in which we live, which is so critically important for the prosperity of the people here in the BVI. Now, the bill that we have was designed to address a number of issues which we spotted during the last major storms in 2010. Now, let me just give you one example. If you remember, in 2010, one of the problems we had was with derelict vessels, which are now stored sitting in Boggers Bay. The current legislation doesn't really give adequate cover to move those vessels if they're creating an obstacle. And that's been one of the problems government has had. So the new bill contains a clause 26, which gives the director of the Virgin Islands Shipping Registry the power to move vessels if they're causing an obstruction. That's just one example. There are other examples where we took specific incidents, the way in which an incident happened here in the BVI, we learnt lessons and have incorporated those lessons into the new legislation.
The legislative changes outlined in the 2011 Act include the establishment of zonal committees, preparation of a disaster management plan with annual updates, compensation for any person who suffers personal injury, loss, or damage to personal property in the course of performing functions, and that the director of the DDM consults with the governor prior to the governor issuing an order of evacuation, among others.